All right, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to the keynote address. If you are just here for the keynote address and haven't registered for the whole convention, um, it is by donation, pay what you can. There's a box by the Christmas tree towards the exit of the room that you can donate cash in, or you can donate online on the NFU website. With that, I will introduce our keynote speaker. Austin Frerick is an expert on agricultural and antitrust policy. He worked at the Open Markets Institute, the U.S. Department of Treasury, and the Congressional Research Service before becoming a fellow at Yale University. He is a seventh-generation Iowan and a first-generation college graduate with degrees from Grinnell College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Barron's, which is for sale at the Turning the Tide bookshop table over there, and which some of you may have read, is the story of seven titans of the food industry, their rise to power, and the consequences for workers, eaters, and democracy itself. Readers will meet a secretive German family that took over the global coffee industry in less than a decade, relying on wealth traced back to the Nazis to gobble up countless independent roasters. They'll visit the Disneyland of agriculture, where school children ride trams through mechanized warehouses filled with tens of thousands of cows that never see the light of day. And they will learn that in the food business, crime really does pay, especially when you can bribe and then double-cross the president of Brazil. Barron's paints a stark portrait of corporate consolidation, but it also shows that a fair, healthy, and prosperous food industry is possible if we take back power from the barons who have robbed us of it. So with that, please put your hands together to welcome Austin Frerick.
Hey everybody. Well, first of all, I just want to thank the organizers for putting this event together. This book table over here is really cool, and I've never seen something like it before. I literally just bought a book before I walked on stage. And also, I even thought it was really cool that they put together like a tourist list for this event, this conference. I had so much fun. I came in yesterday. I did the art museum. I did the Native American museum. It's been lovely. I just really appreciate that, how much thought and care went into that. I should also say I want to thank your organization. You guys have really good reports. That's the nerd in me, but I always tell people every commodity is different, but dairy tends to be the most complex. The joke in America with the federal milk order is only 5 people understand it and 4 are dead. And I feel like the similar joke applies to the Canadian quota system, but your quota report I thought was incredible. I've been trying to understand it for years now, and I really appreciate how it kind of walked me through that and also the tension points within it. So I just want to give kudos to those involved in it. And just that stuff like that takes a lot of work, but it's really, really important. I also I loved your ethanol report you just put out. That's on my to read on the plane home because I'm from Iowa, and Iowa is, sorry, try not to laugh. The largest use of corn now in America is ethanol. And I use this joke at Iowa State, which to me is the heart of the beast. It's the heart of big ag in America. And anyone that thinks ethanol is good for the climate in 2024 thinks the world is flat. All right. Oh, try using that joke. I mean, I was afraid I was going to get tarred and feathered at Iowa State, but luckily I didn't. So let me start off. So my book, I profile 7 robber barons. But think of the robber barons as narrative devices to tell bigger structural stories. Like Cargill's really about the Farm Bill. So think of it as hiding your vegetables. It's the kind of way I look at it. Let me tell you like a punchy story of a rich person to tell you these bigger things. So how do we get to this point? Let me first start off by showing this chart. What I realized is that in the back of people's minds when I started giving this presentation was, I'm asking you to pay for more money for food. And what I love about this chart, and this is from the US Department of Agriculture, they do a data set on what people in all these countries across the world spend on food. And what you can see, I mean, look at the USA expenditure. They spend more money on food than most Western democracies, and I think about dollar per dollar for Italy. Canada, you guys are a little bit lower, but anyone that's been to Italy and America knows the quality is very different. Sorry. What industry tends to do is, if they're smart, they say percent of income. Oh, for what people make, we spend the least amount of money on food. Here's the thing, they're factually right. Check out that 6.7%, or 10% here. Here's the thing, this is a good nerdy example of how one data set can tell you two different things. To the bottom half of people, they don't care about percent of income. They care about that $3,000, that $2,700. We live in such a have-not time anymore that ratio, that percent of income, doesn't really apply. In economics, they call it a Gini coefficient. It's the ratio between the have-nots, and it's so skewed. So I just want to focus on what people spend out of their pocket. Here's the thing, we shouldn't be shocked. I really do think the food markets are the most concentrated space. Here's the thing though, even when we talk about concentration in the food system, they're always in national figures. Well, food's regional. You're not gonna take milk from BC and sell it in Halifax. Check out this paper. This is a dairy friend of mine in Wisconsin did a paper on how one company has an 85% market share in New England and the New York City area. I don't need a PhD in economics to tell you that those people are not paying a fair price for milk. They're being gouged. But here's the thing though, never forget, the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. That's where profits are. So you have this fundamental tension between government wanting competitive markets for farmers, for workers, for people in the store, and then business not. They want to capture those markets. Okay, so I want to show you this slide. This is a pending merger between Kroger and Albertsons. I think I drove by a Safeway earlier, so I think some of these brands are here. Check out all these brands. I mean, that's a good example of illusion of choice. If this merger goes through, those two would be approved. President Biden, and we'll talk about this more later, appointed this young woman to the head of the competition authority in America. She's challenging this merger. A month ago, I would have said she was going to win. Who knows right now? What's been really interesting, though, in this lawsuit she brought is when the executives testified, they admit they were price gouging, but they're doing it in small towns. Here's the thing. Think of the darkness of that. The people making our food are the ones paying the most for it. It's because there's no competition in these markets. And the other thing, I want to flag this paper. I really do think a conversation should be had over agricultural economics. I think it's one of the most corrupt disciplines right now in the academy. There's a lot of corporate money sloshing around that's not disclosed. This journalist turned lawyer, Kate Conlow, wrote a paper just published in the Arizona State Law Journal showing that a lot of these academic journals have disclosure policies, but they're not enforcing them. She even highlights one academic who brags about on his corporate website how much money he's taken from Big Ag. He's an editor of a journal and doesn't enforce his own policies. Here's the thing. This is the same person taking money from the grocery store saying you're not being gouged. It's really corrupting the public conversation. So my first baron, this is Iowa Select Farms. This is the baron that started this whole thing for me. I literally was in a dive bar in Iowa and I heard about them. They're the most politically powerful people in the state of Iowa. They gave $300,000 to the Republican governor. Not only that, they have a home in the fancy part of the state and they have a home in Naples, Florida, and they fly back and forth on their private jet with the words allegedly on it, "When pigs fly." First of all, I thought that was great copy. But second, I think this whole chapter to me is both the story of regulatory capture, but also what happens when you don't have a quota system. So, as I mentioned, this is the article I first wrote that led to this book, The Hog Barons. Check out that. I mean, I know this is common here too, but besides most of these confinements are these dumpsters just full of bloated dead pigs. About 10% of pigs die inside these metal sheds. So this is an undercurrent of my book is what is a farmer. My hog baron's farm is at bottom right, an office. Is that a farm or is that a suburban dentist clinic? Check out his operation in the top left. That's incredible soil. That should be prairie, but it looks like the New Jersey Turnpike. It's dead and industrial. So my hog baron has about 7,000 employees. Keep in mind, he did this all in my lifetime. His whole operation is in the state of Iowa. Part of the reason why he gives so much money to the governor is he needs a controller because that's where his operation is based. And when this whole thing happens, we're told this story, oh, this happened because of efficiency. Oh, they got big because they were the best and brightest. When you dig into it, what you realize is, no, this is just an old story of regulatory capture. A race to the bottom. What you realize with robber barons is they're willing to cross ethical lines that other people
Quality
aren't
of
willing to
saving those
cross.
farms.
Most hog farmers weren't willing to shove their animals into a metal shed. And so what you see happen here, and I tell this history, I kind of blame chicken fingers for a lot of this stuff. When America wrote its regulations a century ago, in response to the Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, we didn't write chicken to the regulations because there weren't chicken slaughterhouses. You just had a chicken in your backyard and you butchered it. So what happened in Southern America was corporations took that model of sharecropping that exploited black farmers and applied it to chicken production. They call it chickenization, where like 70% of chicken farmers in America now live in poverty because it's such an exploitive system. What happened was that model started replicating itself across the food system. Hogs chickenized. So it started in North Carolina, eastern North Carolina. A state senator literally wrote the regulations and then did it himself and built a hog empire. And he did it in the poor black areas too. To me, this is one of the best examples of structural racism I've seen. In Iowa, with all the manure from these things, they inject it into the ground. In North Carolina, the water table's too high, so they spray it into the air. So it's all these stories of poor black churches having to repaint their steeples every few years because they turn brown. So the business elite of the state were like, they saw North Carolina getting all this market share. Instead of being like, you can't do this, the business elite were like, we're going to engage in this race to the bottom. We're going to forego the family farm because it's all about selling as much seed as possible and butchering as many hogs as possible. So you see the environmental consequence. You see this destruction of that and all these regulations being thrown out the door. And you see the hog family farm collapse, but the amount of hogs have just soared. Iowa has about 25 million hogs. Hogs defecate 3 times more than us. That's manure of 75 million people. That's California, Texas, and Illinois combined, and that regulatory structure has been gutted. The environment, simply put, cannot handle this much manure. Waterways in my home state are like 70% too polluted to go in. They're basically an open sewer. Again, this is what happens when you don't have a quota system. The worst actors win. And second, now, this is the really scary thing, Iowa is now at the second highest cancer rate in America, and it's getting worse. My second baron, Cargill. Cargill's a wild one. When I started this book, I didn't know much about Cargill. Here's the thing, I played soccer next to Cargill, I went to church next to Cargill, I was born next to a Cargill plant in Cedar Rapids. Cargill, to me, is the closest thing we have to a modern day Standard Oil. They're all about owning the middle, but they're not consumer facing. If you're a beef rancher, you might know who they are because of their holdings in beef, the slaughtering, but check this out. This is from one of their own pamphlets. We are the flour in your bread, the wheat in your noodles, the salt on your fries. We are the corn in your tortillas, the chocolate in your dessert, the sweetener in your soft drink. We are the oil in your salad dressing, and the beef, pork, or chicken you ate for dinner. We are the cotton in your clothing, the backing on your carpet, and the fertilizer in your field. First of all, that's incredible prose. Second, wow, that is a display of power. Just to understand their size, take all the state tax revenue of these green states and you equal Cargill. It's the largest private company in America. They are bigger than the Koch brothers. I use their story, as I mentioned, to tell the story of Farm Bill. Keep this story simple. The American Farm Bill is rooted in, I think of Goldilocks. Comes out of the New Deal. You get a little subsidy, but you have to take land out of production. You only get so much. Cargill hated this. They thought FDR was evil. They thought he was Marxist. Turns out a stable farm system is actually good for business. Their business thrived underneath him. Funny how that is. But here's the thing. They started attacking it from day one because they want to process and move as much grain as possible. That's their whole business. So they basically broke the Farm Bill in America. I focused on the 1996 one, where now the American Farm Bill is designed to overproduce grains at the expense of everything else. So corn gets a ton of subsidy. and carrots don't. So we come up with artificial uses for surplus. That's where you get dumb things like ethanol. Instead of being like, because every year is a record crop. Instead of being like, well, maybe let's grow lentils, it's just let's find more uses. Let's put ethanol in airplanes now. That's how you get those dumb illogical things like that. Check this out. This is for every dollar you spend at the store what a farmer gets. After these reforms, you saw the highest ever, more than 50 cents. And then you just see it utterly collapse, down to 13 cents. I do not believe this data set is created in Canada. I really recommend the creation of this. I think this stuff is incredibly insightful and important. But just imagine what this does for real communities when they're only getting 13 cents back of what they produce versus 50. I kind of view a lot of rural communities in the States as extraction colonies at this point. All the wealth is leaving them, but yet they're producing the most they've ever produced. And the politics of rage are filling the void. Check this out. When we talk about obesity, a lot of times it's rooted in personal, when it's really structural. You need money to eat healthy because we're subsidizing highly processed food. And you just see so much of the obesity crisis rooted in this. Because keep in mind, what this system does too is it pushes people to do the grains and not produce. And finally, I think what's going to be really, I can't get my head around, is what these obesity drugs are going to do. I think it's going to exacerbate the have-notness of the food system. Already, the marker of your income is your body size, and I think this will just exacerbate it, where the highest use of these diet drugs are like on the Upper East Side of New York City. And finally, I realized writing this chapter, I thought of them as Standard Oil, but Cargill, actually a better example is they're kind of like the 19th century British Empire. The sun never sets on Cargill, grain empire. They're still in Russia because you don't know who they are. So don't feel that consumer backlash. And I want to highlight this Oxfam report from 10 years ago where Colombia, in response to sorry, I thought I hit a wrong button. Oh, no problem. In response to a civil war, Colombia instituted land reform. And it turns out they discovered Cargill not only exceeded this, it exceeded by 36 times. That's a really scary thing of an entity this powerful that we know so little about. It's just its dark tentacles are kind of everywhere. Oh, can you go to my next slide? Oh, oopsie, go back. You just ruined the surprise. So this is my coffee baron. So my mom used to have a coffee shop. So this is the chapter's kind of personal to me because I talk about my mom's coffee shop. And this whole chapter is really about competition policy and the history of it. So the next slide I'm about to show you is they didn't sell a single bean of coffee in North America until 2012. And then they threw a bunch of money at the coffee markets and they consolidated it. In private equity, they call this a roll-up. Keep in mind, they now sell more coffee than Starbucks. They own all these brands. And it's a secret German family, too. When they bought those little Keurig, those little Keurig things, when they bought Keurig, they got all these brands. Dr. Pepper, A&W, Snapple, Sunkist. That's what this family does. They engage in monopoly plays. Because they saw, here's the thing, they saw a competitive market and they saw an opportunity to consolidate and get a monopoly position. And who this really hurts are coffee farmers. Because what used to be 20 buyers of coffee are now one. As I mentioned, this is my competition policy chapter. Fun fact, the first competition policies in the world come from farmers. Iowa farmers were mad about the railroad, so they created it. And then you see that spread across the world. A lot of the competition laws go back to this man named Louis Brandeis. He really believed at his core that you want to avoid concentrations of power, economic power, because it corrupts up local system. And he especially disliked inorganic growth. And what I mean by that is when someone gets big just from buying, like the coffee baron is what he does not like at all, because usually it's corners are cut, and America had a framework for the longest time preventing, like the coffee baron could not have done what they did just a few decades ago. But then comes a man named Robert Bork under President Reagan, who basically threw that out and created this whole thing called consumer welfare standard, which means if one company buys another company and you can find an economist to say prices will go down for consumers, your merger will be approved. Well, you can find any economist to make you those numbers. And this has been kind of the intellectual framework in the globe for the last few decades. Here's the thing. People like him are a dime a dozen. You're always going to find academics willing to do the bidding of the rich. And what's really exciting is this young woman. President Biden appointed her to be chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission. She's the one, it was just announced yesterday, her solution to the Google's monopoly is they have to sell off an asset. She got some really big victories in antitrust. And it's kind of incredible to see. I mean, she's kind of a hero. She did a fertilizer hearing in Iowa this summer, and 100 people showed up. No bureaucrat gets 100 people. And a lot of Republicans praise her, who knows if that's legit or not, but she's kind of like, do you ever see that statue of that little girl standing up to the bull on Wall Street? She is that statue. People crave someone standing up to power right now. And she's also, what's really interesting intellectually is all the law students want to be her. So you're seeing a lot of cool law papers come out, reflecting her framework. And her whole framework is, let's return to this old framework of power, of avoiding concentrations of power. Lena Khan. You know what's funny story about her? I mean, she's the one that got me on this whole thing. Is in 2016, in a different life, I was a Treasury tax economist, and I wrote a paper on the growth of monopoly profits in the American corporate tax base, and I saw it in food, and I was like, why does someone who sells chips and soda have a monopoly? In theory, anyone could do that. Before she went to law school, she was a journalist, and she wrote about chicken monopolies. She wrote a law school paper on how Amazon's a monopoly, and that went viral, and that's how she got that political appointee. It's kind of an incredible thing. Like a good paper, someone gets power, they can do the right thing. But the whole point, too, of this chapter is, I think lost history is how monopolists finance fascists. After World War II, the US Congress commissioned a report, how did this happen? And that's one of their key findings. Hitler's largest donor was a company called IG Farben. The congressional report said, quote, their campaign donation made the dreams of Mein Kampf come true. One of the chemicals they sold was the gas used in the chambers. After the war, the Allies broke them up into 7 different companies. You might have heard, and there's a great book on this called Hell's Cartel. One of the companies you might have heard of, it's called Bayer Monsanto. And finally, right before I went to press, so this family has a dark German history, a Nazi past to it. They're early Nazi supporters. This was disclosed by British tabloids. They made amends for it. They made a donation, promised to do better. And then right before press, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal that the family still sells coffee in Russia. And I think Putin is the closest modern day example to a fascist. So the fact they're still doing that tells me your words mean absolutely nothing. Fairlife. Probably seen this milk in the grocery store. Coca-Cola owns it, but my dairy baron created it. As one Coke executive described it, it's twice the price of milk for half the volume. It's bougie milk. It's a weird thing to say about my barons. You have to both admire them, but both be scared of them. He's an incredible one to study because neither one comes from a farm family. Yet they're now are some of the most powerful dairy people in America. They're part of a 35,000 cow operation. What he saw, and they started in California. He was a vet by training. They started in New Mexico, which some of you might know it's actually a massive dairy state. New Mexico does 3 times more dairy than Vermont. Is because these industrial things do a lot of manure, and there's no one there to complain about the smells. But he saw the coming water crisis in the West, so he moved his operation up to south of Chicago. But he saw what happened to the hog farmers in Iowa, and he goes, I am not going down like that. I'm going to make a branded product, and that's how you get this Fairlife. And it's doing in blockbuster numbers. People love it for the long shelf life, and young men are obsessed with protein right now. This is I could write a whole other book on this. Everyone's talking about what Instagram's doing to young girls. It's doing something similar to boys and their bodies. Steroid use is up insane levels, but protein use is really up. Cottage cheese is doing blockbuster numbers, which I love cottage cheese. But Fairlife, you go to any Planet Fitness, any gym in America, you're going to see this product. So this is where their farm is. And so here's the thing. I'm not sure what the Canadian equivalent is, but they bought 20,000 acres at once. That's massive. And the only reason why they're able to do this was it was supposed to be a third Chicago airport. And here's the thing that's wild to me. When I was driving around their operation, there was canals everywhere. And I had never seen canals in the Midwest before. So I was like, what's going on here? I discovered this used to be a wetland. Lake Michigan used to overflow into this area. It was an Everglade. Everglades of the North is what they called it. Teddy Roosevelt used to go hunting here. So the wetlands were drained. Actually, where his farm is was kind of where that lake is. So first of all, you probably shouldn't even be doing row crops, let alone dairy cow. I mean, these dairy cows defecate like 60 pounds a day. I've heard different numbers, 60 or 80 pounds a day. That's equivalent to the city of Austin, Texas, is how much manure is being produced here. What? Oh, halftime. Okay. This is one of the dairy. He wanted to get ahead of the narrative, so he turned his dairy operation to a tourist attraction. I call it the Disneyland of agriculture. You can literally board a cow-themed bus and go down, and you are told how happy the girls are, how sustainable the operation is. Here, look at this. There's a whole map. There's an ice cream parlor. There's like a dairy carton rock climbing wall. There's a Marriott dairy hotel you can't see. It's one of the largest tourist attractions in the state of Indiana. It is, I'm not going to talk too much about it because this is very American focused, but there's something called a checkoff, and that's what this chapter is about. He really used money from family dairy farmers going broke to create this. He corrupted a government program. So that even that branded milk, he used money from dairy family farms going broke to do it. On top of it, when you put dairy cows indoors like this, you create additional methane gas. Because when cows are on land, they defecate, they're fertilizing their feed. When you put them inside, you need fossil fuels to grow their feed, but then you have to pool their manure, and when you pool it, it creates additional methane gas. So then he used money from family farmers going broke to essentially create junk science to justify his manure digesters. He wanted taxpayer money to capture the gas. It's just one big. An undercurrent in my book is the anger I have towards Secretary Tom Vilsack. He's a former governor from my home state, and he, to me, oh man. There's a musical set in Iowa called The Music Man. If you've ever seen The Simpsons, it's called Monorail Man episode. That is what Tom Vilsack is. He's Harold Hill. He's a snake oil man. He'll tell you what you want to hear, but his words mean absolutely nothing. He loves this. He used to be an industrial dairy lobbyist, taking money from this checkoff program, saying this is the future of American dairy. And by the way, again, this is what happens when you don't have a quota system. You get the most ruthless actor dominate the system. And you see his sales take off. They had they had a national animal welfare abuse, a scandal. You see that little dip, and then it just goes right back on. I uncovered while writing this chapter is my dairy baron have you ever heard of the show Dirty Jobs? He's been on there, pretending to work hard. He claims residency at the Ritz-Carlton in Puerto Rico. Fun fact, if you live there most of the year, you don't pay capital income taxes. And one might assume when you recently sold Fairlife to Coca-Cola, bingo. I gotta be careful with legal stuff here. Industrial dairy is really different than the others and is really scary because of the labor component. It's labor intensive. And a lot of times the dairy operator is both the employer and the landlord. On top of it, they tend to be the largest employers in the area. So I almost view them as feudal lords. Keep in mind, a lot of these men are undocumented to actually run the operation. My dairy baron claimed over like 100 employees on a farm once. There was an episode on This American Life how you'll see 12 men to a 2-bedroom trailer. And finally, by researching this chapter, I uncovered a worker that died. And you know the photo I showed you of the cow going down? Literally in that barn. He got sucked into the digester, the manure pit. into the intake thing. Never reported, and this is one of the largest tourist attractions in the state of Indiana, and this was never reported. It took me 2 years to get these records. Driscoll's. Now, I was at the Co-op grocery store earlier, and I saw a ton of Driscoll's berries. Driscoll's is my berry baron. They sell 1 in 3 berries in America, but they don't grow a single berry. They took that chicken model. They own the IP of the berry, and they have other people grow it. So that way they're evading environmental and labor responsibilities. And also, what this chapter talks about is how much these trade agreements have pushed produce offshore in a race to the bottom. So like in America, 60% of the fruit and 40% of the vegetables now come from outside the boundaries. There's been tons of reporting on this, of just when supply chains get long, transparency collapses, and you see exploitation of labor and the environment. I mean, stories of kids picking berries for other kids. I mean, Reuters has done a lot of investigation how a lot of Mexican gains now are in the avocado business. And also keep in mind, farmers doing it right cannot compete on price against this. You cannot compete against a 12-year-old child labor production model. And I should also say, another point in my book is this system makes bad tasting food. This berry is not engineered for taste, it's engineered for durability. They grow berries on every continent in the world except Antarctica. So sometimes your berries are from Morocco, sometimes they're from Argentina, but they're all the same blah. Actually, I noticed it the most in dairy. I did little dairy milk tastings. Inputs matter. When cows are fed corn in New Mexico, they're not going to make a good product compared to like pasture cows. I think that's something not underappreciated in the food system. It's also then it turns consumers away from these products. Oh. And then also too, there was an investigation by Consumer Reports this summer where a lot of labeling is starting to, like organic. How can you trust an organic label from Turkey? You can't, I personally don't trust, I only trust domestic organic labels at best, but there's just rampant fraud with this organic label when it moves offshore, because you're relying on those countries to fulfill their obligations. And then so a lot of berries have moved to Baja, California. Baja only gets 3 inches of rain a year. That's as much as Death Valley. So they first drained the aquifers, and then they built desalination plants. No one really lived there, so they brought in indigenous workers to live there. You're at your own safety if you try to go investigate this stuff. I almost view them as like modern day plantations in terms of the power dynamics you see at play here. And then even one little recent example, this is in Watsonville, California, where Driscoll's is based. This is an elementary school where most farm workers send their kids. The farm workers just asked them, look at that playground right there. Please don't do chemicals near where our kids play. Can you do organics? And Driscoll's, what did they do? Oh, we can't do anything. You know what I mean? Our farmers can do whatever they want. Here's the thing. They actually have a larger market share in organics. They have like a 50% market share. And it goes back to this notion of they're trying to evade responsibility. I'm going to kind of speed this up. JBS Foods. This is my slaughtering baron. This is what I know. And even this story shocked me because it came out right before the 2020 American election. It got lost in the news. They got caught bribing over 1,800 Brazilian politicians. I'm not talking campaign contributions. I'm talking like they gave Manhattan apartment. And as part of their plea deal, they literally agreed to wear a wire recording bribing the president of Brazil. At the same time, he thought his house was haunted, so he was living at the vice president's house. And then when this story was announced, they got accused of engaging in fraud, or I forget the term, but they knew their stock would crater, so they made a bet against it. So as they're making a plea bargain, they're trying to shorting. Yes, they shorted their stock. Thank you. They're the closest thing we have to a modern-day criminal organization. They're number 1 in beef in the world, number 1 in chicken, number 2 in pork, number 1 in leather. So here's the thing. They own all these brands. First slide. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. And even this one got me. I was at a fancy restaurant in DC and they had this on the menu. All our beef is from this local farm. I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So I was like, ooh, Cedar Rapids beef. And so, you pay the premium, you buy the product. I go home, look it up, and it's fake. It's one of their fake local brands. It's based out of Grinnell, Colorado. And they're even on the east coast of US, and I wouldn't be shocked if they don't come to Toronto soon. They're building these fake local meat stores. I know they're fake because that's too good looking for like a local meat store. But it's all, they're exploiting the image of people doing it right. And again, going back to Tom Vilsack, instead of actually tackling the meat monopolies these last 4 years, they threw $1 billion to finance new startups. On top of it, all the big boys made acquisitions, including Walmart. That's the scariest thing. Walmart was so irked because people judge your grocery store based on your Walmart and your meat and dairy case. So Walmart was irked as being gouged by these slaughtering barons, so it's making its own vertical plays into beef right now. And dairy too, I should say. Walmart's building 3 milk plants in America. And then Vilsack didn't do anything, and now it turns out all these slaughterhouses he financed are going belly up. There literally one chicken one closed in Iowa last month, and there were stories in local news being, come get a free chicken. And not enough people did, so the state had to spend millions of dollars to kill millions of chickens. Walmart is my grocery baron. Walmart's market, they sell 1 in 3 groceries in America. Their market share is the same as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th combined. If I had a table of barons, they would be the head honcho. Here's the thing, their market share isn't as big here, but your grocery markets are more concentrated than ours. Your 3 dominant players. The thing though to keep in mind is grocery is regional. So like Walmart just owns middle of America, and where it plays, it has like a 70 or 80% market share in like Wichita, Kansas. And they're the world's richest family. I mean, this kind of changes depending on the day, but this whole chapter is I frame it around Amazon and Walmart have been in an epic war these last 5 years, centered in grocery. Kind of think of it as like Godzilla versus Mothra. I actually wanted to frame this chapter around, I think Walmart is the closest thing we've ever had in the history to a Soviet Union-style Politburo. It's supply and command with Walmart. If you supply to Walmart, you don't negotiate with Walmart. You take what they offer you. And here's the thing with Walmart. The Walmart family owns like 50% of Walmart. Jeff Bezos only owns like 10% of Amazon. I mean, the Walmart family owns these 2 NFL teams. In Bentonville, Arkansas, if you ever get a chance to go there, it's booming right now. They own everything in town. It's kind of scary. It's like a company town. And actually, the Walmart Supercenter is actually a French idea. There's a French company called Carrefour, Sam Walton saw. In Europe, they have these things called hypermarkets, where you put a grocery store next to a discount store. He brought this concept to America. The original Walmart Supercenter was actually twice the size. They're called hypermarkets, where literally workers roller skated inside them because they were so big. But he realized there was too much walking for Americans. So the Walmart Supercenter we know today is a small town version of this concept. This I want to flag for you is, to me, a really good example of Walmart's power. If you supply to Walmart, Walmart says no more than 30% of your sales can come from Walmart. Here's the thing, I didn't understand why. I had to ask people in the grocery business what's going on, which, by the way, this is my favorite chapter. I love grocery stores. And what the grocery people told me is, Austin, this is a supply chain risk management strategy. Walmart knows it's such a vulture that it needs you to get at least 70% of your sales elsewhere, or else you put yourself at the risk of bankruptcy. Even look, it publishes a list. I found this in the local business news and trade publications always have the best stuff. They publish a list shaming companies close to that threshold. So Walmart wants you, they want you on life support, but they don't want to kill you. On top of it, this chapter 2 is about food assistance. This model takes a massive amount of government welfare for the world's richest family. I estimate, I think I can't say that number, like $27 billion runs through the registers every year in America. And this is a 10-year-old report. The average Walmart worker gets about $5,000 in government subsidies for the low wages. The thing with Walmart to keep in mind is when Walmart comes to town, you don't buy more milk, you just shift your consumption. It's like a blob. So their whole goal is to capture every dollar of your paycheck. So they're trying out new things like pharmacy, tires. They're trying out vet clinics right now. They're putting healthcare clinics because it's all about capturing that dollar of your paycheck. So first they killed downtown, then they killed the mall. Now they're trying to essentially kill out all the strip malls. So what do we do? Let me back up and say, so much of the goal of my book was, you have to understand how we got here. in order to fix it. You have to see which corners were cut. Like this is what this, I just think we're living in a second Gilded Age, another laissez-faire era, and these eras always come to an end. But you gotta think about what's next. And to me, I really do think the single best thing we can do is put animals back on the land, and here I think that's hogs. I think the industrialization of, I mean, I want dairy cows in America to be back on land, but here's the thing. There's only so many cows one person can look after. You can't have a robot do it. And also, to me, this is about restoring that middle-class family farm, and that's how you make rural communities thrive again. Second are these bright line rules. Knowing that the goal of any corporation is monopoly, how do you put in these barriers? One example in the meat industry is something called a packer ban. It literally says you cannot own the animal you slaughter. If you did that, you'd break up most meat companies because they actually own most of their animals. It's a simple rule. I'm married to a lawyer, and the simpler the better because lawyers make their living on gradation. And even something simple as you can only be in one line of protein. If you butcher hogs, you can't butcher chickens. Third is using institutional buyers to drive this new system. As we phase out the old one, you got to help stabilize the ones doing it right. Schools buy a lot of food. Colleges buy a lot of food. Build on that. There's this really good report that came out recently from the Anti-Monopoly Project here. They have some really good recommendations. And one of the simplest one that should be done overnight is data collection. There's not good data here. And it's hard to have a conversation over bad data. And that's intentional, by the way. Industry doesn't want you to know how bad the problem is. But here's the silver lining. This data is really easy to get now. Every time you buy something at the grocery store, that data is sold by Wall Street firms. So you can quickly figure out market shares by each province. I really encourage the creation of those figures because we're just shooting blind right now. And journalists, I think especially for this room, journalists are your best friends. It's cliche to say this, but see something, say something. A lot of journalists don't make a lot of money and they're moving a mile a minute. One example I want to point to, it's a little gruesome, but it's powerful, is you know the movie Fargo? The mulch scene? A confinement owner in Iowa was doing that to his hogs and just throwing it onto his field. This older woman in Iowa saw it, called the government agency to report him because that's illegal. They're gutted, they didn't do anything. So you know what she did? She went to local TV news. That story blew up, and the state agency was finally forced to act. But she took, and that's what the story you see in the bottom left. She took it into her own hands. Even if you read a story and you don't like the way the journalist handled something or they quoted the wrong person, don't get mad on Twitter. That doesn't do anything. Send a nice email. Hey, you should really talk to Billy Bob over here. You know, this person's kind of, I do this, there's certain academics that bother me because they're so corrupt. I like to send emails when they get quoted being like, oh, you should really look at, you should really know this about them. Go to the next slide. And finally, I mean, you're all here in this room, and I can't say this enough, but I realized writing this book is you got to join an organization. You cannot fight these fights alone. And I realized this actually from Julie Dunn, who I opened my book with. She's a retired secretary in, oh my God, Eldora, Iowa. And this is what she does in retirement, is she fights hog confinements. But she's part of a group called Iowa CCI. To be frank, Iowa CCI is mainly pissed off old women. Yeah, they get shit done. They know the receipts, and here's the thing is, a lot of them don't want attention. They're just doing it because they saw what the system used to be, and she keeps telling me she's doing it for her granddaughter. Because we didn't get here overnight, we're not gonna get to the new system overnight, but it starts by fighting back. Also, it's kind of fun, lean into the David versus Goliath. And organizations kind of help you, you feel like you're a part of a team. So I know you're all in the room, I encourage you to bring other people to join this organization, but that is something I think underappreciated, how much you need to be part of something. You cannot do this alone. It'll break you down. And two last notes is, I'm working on a new Baron. So if anyone knows anything about Cisco, I'm obsessed with Cisco right now. And I know this is being recorded, but I'm actually talking to the family. This is a really fascinating story. I don't know their Canadian market share, but in America, they have a 50% market share in the distribution to restaurants. And finally, I'm toying with this idea, so I'm going to workshop it with you all, is I also realize people want hope right now. we know the system is broken. What should it be? So I actually want to focus on food markets that work, like Irish butter. Irish butter is doing blockbuster numbers. Maine lobster, Vermont maple syrup, Kentucky bourbon. I don't know if you have any ideas. It's like, what country has a really good meat regulation system? I don't know. If you know any of this, let me know. That's kind of where my head's at. That's the biggest thing I get. There's two questions I always get asked. One, are you worried about your safety? Two, what should we do? You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. That's honestly why I wanted to learn about your dairy system. Is I wanted to see it, like, you don't have these mega 35,000 cow operations. Why? And finally, I want to end with this slide. The system we have now is radical. So many of these reforms we're talking about are traditional. I want to focus on the labor component. 1 in 10 people work in the food system. My dad's a truck driver. My mom ran a bakery, as I mentioned. By focusing on that I think you help take the temperature down. Like, who isn't happy after a good meal? This system, as I said, makes bad tasting food. So by doing that, it's help. That is like what I want to focus my career on. And it's also, you see what the system could be. I mean, this room is full of people doing it right. How do we build on that? How do we copy and paste? And so on that note, I would love to take your guys' questions now. Thank you so much. Real quick too, if there's anyone that's willing to review my book, I would love that. I have not gotten a Canadian book review, and that's like a little pet peeve of mine. Or sorry, a goal. Sorry, not pet peeve. I say that, that's a really weird word choice. It's the state of media. In America, only 3 newspapers have book critics on staff. So I'm a first-time author, so it's really hard to get attention. So I kind of think of the book world as like the movie industry. There's Marvels and there's everyone else. So if anyone's willing to write a book review, I'd really appreciate it.